Okay, here's the long exposure image that we want to convert to black and white. And this image, it took 181 seconds to render this at f11. And this, again, of course, was taken in broad daylight using the ND filter that I talked about in the book. So let's convert this to black and white. Now, if you were to just go to the fourth panel here in Camera Raw, and we are in Camera Raw, and this is where you would do the conversion, which is, it's part of Photoshop, but rather than actually going to Photoshop itself, where it would be harder, doing it in Camera Raw is much easier. And just remember, as long as you open your images from the bridge, you do not have to have shot in RAW. You can shoot in JPEG or TIFF or even a PSD, and just when you're in the bridge, click on the photo you want to open in Camera Raw and press Command R on Mac or Control R on PC, and it will open the image in Camera Raw. In fact, you can see this image here is a JPEG. All right, let's do our conversion. We click on the fourth tab. Let's click on Convert to Grayscale. Well, it doesn't look like much, does it? It creates kind of just a flat looking image. I'm going to go ahead and save a picture of that so we can refer back to it. I'll just click the little icon just off the screen here. We'll call this Original Black and White. Now we're going to go to the very first panel here, this one right here, the basic panel. And this is where I do most of the work. First step is to make it a lot brighter. So I'm going to grab the exposure slider, drag it over to the right, and make it quite a bit brighter. If you look at the typical long exposure black and white images, they're usually very, very bright like this. Now, we're going to also add some more detail in some of these dark areas by increasing the fill light amount. So we'll just drag this to the right and increase that a bit. Now the whole thing looks a little washed out, and in that case, you go to the next slider, the blacks, and drag them up until the thing looks nice and contrasty. And if you want to add more contrast, just grab the contrast slider. There we go. This is pretty standard what I'd do for a black and white image, because what makes a really great black and white image is contrast. The more contrast, the better. Lastly, I would go to clarity. This kind of, the best way I can describe it is it enhances the texture in your file. So anything that has a lot of texture like this does, I would really crank up the clarity quite a bit. And the last thing I would probably do is just sharpen it to death. Okay, landscape images like this can usually handle a lot of sharpening, so I'll go to the sharpening panel. Going to increase the amount to maybe 75. Really crank it up, and maybe the radius to 1.5 for mega sharpening. Woo, that is sharp. Let's go up to 75 here. There we go. That's some super sharp. Let's actually stop at 75. There we go. So now I'm going to make a capture of that. We'll call this Better Black and White. All right, and now you can see the difference between where we first converted to the black and white, which looks kind of flat and ugly, and then this conversion. Again, you can do this in Lightroom in the Develop module because it is Camera Raw. It has Camera Raw built right into it. Or you can do it in Camera Raw that comes with Photoshop and is part of Photoshop. So there's the before, there's the after, and just a quick look back. What did we really do? We increased the exposure a little bit. Not so much that we were clipping the file, but we increased it a bit. I'm going to double click on it to reset it. Look at the original histogram. Do you see how like there's shadows and then there's midtones and then there's nothing? So I knew I could safely drag this to the right a bit without any problems. So then we increased the fill light so you see more detail inside of here. We increased the black so it didn't look washed out. We increased the contrast, so we added more contrast, and I pumped up the clarity. This is very, very typical for what I'd do for a black and white conversion. Well, there you have it. Really fairly easy stuff. Just go ahead and follow the same kind of sliders. Now, of course, you'll have to tweak to taste, but that's how it's done.